Hello. Today what we're going to cover is to give you a quick overview of Infoblox cloud integration with AWS and Azure. And what you're about to see is a live demo. We're going to record all of this live step by step, where we currently have a grid master and a grid member connected on-prem. This is really running in our lab in Santa Clara, California. And this is a fully working lab environment connected directly to the internet. And as a matter of fact, we opened these ports. The 443 is to connect to the grid master GUI. 1194 UDP is for OpenVPN, and 2114 UDP is for the key exchange. So when we spin up grid members, as you will see shortly in Amazon and Azure, these ports need to be open on the grid master, so the grid members will connect to the grid master. So what we're about to do today is to show you step by step how we are going to spin up a grid member in Amazon connected to grid master running on-prem, and similarly spin up a grid member running in Azure to connect it to the grid master on-prem. This will give you a lot of advantages. You'll get centralized visibility, so you get basically a single pane of glass of both your on-prem DDI environment as well as your DDI running in public cloud. Moreover, we'll show you some advanced capabilities such as vDiscovery, which is the ability to discover all the VMs in Amazon as well as Azure. And we'll also show you a demo of Route 53 integration, how certain records that get created in Amazon can then be synchronized down to the grid master running on-prem. And again, it will give you the single pane of glass for both all of your DDI activities running on-prem as well as in public cloud. So what exactly are we going to cover today? So the first thing is to give you a quick overview of how the grid master and the grid member are currently configured. Everything running in a virtual environment under VMware, ES6i, and of course using vCenter. And then we're going to spin up a grid member in Azure first, and we're going to connect it to the grid master running on-prem, and you will see how that's going to happen. Similarly, we're going to spin up a grid member running in AWS, and we're going to connect it to on-prem. Then we're going to configure the grid master to accept connections from both Azure and AWS grid members. For that, we need to configure something called the NAT group. So we configure the NAT group on the grid master. We do certain configuration in it, and this basically put the master in a mode where it can accept connections from Azure and AWS. Right? The reason for that is because you don't want anybody to simply connect to the grid master. You need to know the IP address of your local machine, where they're coming from, a bunch of other information to make sure that only those authorized grid members can connect to the grid master. And of course, they will do it over a secure connection, and this is why we need those ports open using an open VPN. So it will be a VPN connection from the Azure grid member as well as Amazon grid member to connect to your grid master that's running on-prem. So once we've done all of that, the other thing we need to do is we enable DNS service on both Azure and AWS grid members. And once you've enabled that, then we can do vDiscovery. And as I mentioned earlier, vDiscovery is the ability to allow you to discover a lot of resources that are running on both Azure and AWS. So you get the great single pane of glass, wonderful visibility into your cloud environment. Once we've done all of that, then we'll also show you vDiscovery running on-prem, for VMware. So you can actually discover all the VMs running in the VMware environment, and we can actually automatically create the DNS records for all the records that we automatically discover. It's a wonderful functionality, as you will see shortly. And last but not least, we'll show you some advanced cool functionality in terms of how to configure Route 53 on the grid member and how it will synchronize with the grid master. So a lot of cool stuff, and again, we're going to do this live over the internet, and so get ready. All right, so now that you have a high-level understanding of what we're trying to do in this demo, let's get into the details. So the first thing is we're going to log on to the grid master. As you can see here, we're logged on to the grid master, and I'd like to show you by clicking on the grid, and this will show you how my current topology is currently set up. So the grid master is over here. As you can see, it's running. And I also have an on-prem grid member running over here. And again, both of them running as virtual appliances under VMware. Okay, so it's a super clean environment with a grid master and a grid member running in our lab in Santa Clara, California. And again, this environment is connected directly to the internet. Now, a couple of things before we get started. I want to show you a quick overview of the environment. So you can see here the grid master, it's in the VM 1410, and then the grid member is 820. Okay. Now you will also notice the cloud tab as currently is empty. This is the cloud tab that will be populated when we run vDiscovery to show you all the resources available under VMware, AWS, and Azure. Okay. If you go to the grid master, you will also notice that I have the DNS service turned on both the grid master and the grid member. And if I go to administration, go under network view, you will see that there's only one network view, which is called default. And this is the default network view that basically gets configured when you install the grid master. Later on, we're going to be creating multiple network views when we start discover resources under Azure and AWS. Okay. And if you go to data management, you will see I have a network right now. This network is created. And there's really nothing in it, just basically the grid member, as you can see here, the IP address of the grid member in the lab environment. And I also have a domain name already created called mycompany.com. And later on, as you will see, when we discover resources under VMware, all of the records will be automatically populated and become visible in this domain. And if you go to dashboard status, this will give you a quick overview of our current environment. Again, it's a super clean environment. It's a grid master, grid member. I have the DNS service turned on. The cloud tab is currently empty. I have a DNS record created and basically one network created. All right, super clean environment. We are ready to get started. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to log on to Azure using my own personal account. And I'm going to spin up a grid member, or basically we're going to spin up a grid master, and eventually we'll convert it into a grid member. So we're going to walk you through the steps to configure, basically spin up an instance of a grid master in Azure, and then after that we're going to do the same thing running it in AWS. So you can see here, this is my Azure tab. I only have one grid member right now, but it's currently turned off, so I'm going to create a new one shortly. And I have a couple of VMs running in AWS right now, but again, we're going to create one and run it shortly. So let's start with Azure first. So how do we get started? The first thing you need to do, you need to go to dashboard, click on marketplace, and type Infoblox. Okay, you will soon discover that there's only one entry over here. You click on it, and you click on create. And now we're going to go through the process of provisioning an appliance. The appliance I want to pick, let's pick an entry level one. Let's say V825. We give it a name, so let's call it V825-M1 for like member 1. We're going to give it a password. Make sure you pick a strong password so it doesn't complain. Pay as you go, a resource group. So let's go ahead and create a resource group. Again, this is all Azure stuff, so V820, M1A, okay, and US West. You can select the region, but for now, let's keep it on US West. Okay, click OK. We go to the next page. Say, okay, well, what version of NIOS do you want to use for this grid member? So we're going to go with the latest version that's available for Azure, which is 8.3.0. We pick the storage that we need to use. Which storage account you want to use, we'll pick one. I already created this ahead of time for the interest of time. Okay, we go to virtual network. I already have a virtual network created. The subnet, we have two interfaces, one for the LAN interface and one for management. So we select LAN 1 and we select management, click OK. Then an IP address. Do you want to give it a public routable IP address? Yes, because I want to connect to this instance later on over the internet. So I'm going to give this a name. So let's call it IPM1 for member 1. And I want to give it a public routable static IP address so it doesn't change. Click OK. And now we're going to give this instance a domain name so you can connect to it via domain name or via IP. But in this case, we're going to give it a domain name. So we call it V825M1. Okay, and you can see green checked, which means it's available, and this is the domain name that you can connect to, and click OK. Okay, and now you wait a couple of seconds for Azure to basically review your settings, make sure everything is okay, and then the OK button will appear in a few seconds. So now that it passed the validation, we can go ahead and click OK. Last, you will see this message, are you sure you agree to the terms and condition, because you're going to be billed. So basically my account will be billed for this. I'm going to say go ahead and create. And now Azure is in the process of creating your virtual machine, your NIOS virtual machine. Now this is going to take up to 6 minutes to be created. So let's click on refresh, and you will notice here, you will see the progress. And again, it's going to take about 6 minutes for the VM to be created, IP address to be assigned, to be spun up, etc., etc. So we'll come back to it in a few seconds. Now, while we're waiting, let's go ahead and create an instance for the AWS version of the grid member. So we're going to switch over to AWS, click on Launch Instance, and we're going to do a similar process but slightly different. So the first thing you need to do is come over here to Community MI and type Infoblox. You will see lots of models. So let's pick the 8.3.0, and let's copy this name, this number, because I only want to get a list of all the NIOS 8.3.0 appliances. So you see now we're shutting down the list, and the one I want to pick is this guy, 8.3.0 DDI, which basically give you the ability to pick which version of NIOS, which version of vNIOS you want to pick later on when you deploy it in AWS. So, and the other thing I'd like to do is I'm interested in the entry-level version, which is the VA25, which basically uses the R4 large AWS template, as we'll see shortly. So I'm going to copy that. So I'm going to click on select, and you see this is the different flavors or different configuration you want. So the best way to do is Control F and paste this R4 large, because it will take you there directly, so you don't have to search for it. So you select it, click on next. Next is we need to figure out, well, what subnet I want to give an IP address for this VM. I already created one ahead of time. We're going to select the subnet. Let's not worry, a public IP address, we'll do it a little bit later. I'll show you how to do it. And you scroll down, and this is extremely important. By default, there's only one interface that ships with this appliance by AWS. So you want to make sure to add another one. Remember, we need one for LAN 1 and one for management. So we need to add one. And this is a manual process. You have to do it, otherwise things will not work. Okay, click on next. Yep, magnetic storage is fine. Click on next. We don't care about tag for now. Click on next. Security group, basically what ports you want to have open that are available for your appliance. I already created the security group ahead of time for the interest of time, and I selected call NIOS, and those are the ports that must be opened to get the configuration to work. Okay, click on next and say yes, I don't want to use SSD, I want to use the cheaper one, the magnetic one. Click on next. And then, yep, you review your setup, looks good, everything looks good. So let's go ahead and click on launch. And yes, I acknowledge, launch, wait a few seconds, and click on view instances, and there you have it. So now your instance is going to be created, and again, this is going to take about 4 or 5 minutes. Now, while we're waiting for it, we need to do a couple of things. So if you click on this guy, you will see information about your VM, about your vNIOS VM, and you can see we have ETH0 and ETH1, which we added shortly, a few minutes ago. So let's go ahead and click on ETH1, and let's click on the interface ID of ETH1, and this will take us to the segment where we can associate a public routable IP address with this interface, so we can connect to it over the internet. So we're going to go to Actions, and we're going to click on Associate Address, and let's pick a public routable IP address, and this one is available. If it's not available, there is an option in AWS where you can basically allocate a new IP address to become available, but I already allocated it ahead of time, again, to skip a couple of steps. So this is the IP address. I'm going to click on Associate, and it will associate it with ETH1, and it will make this environment available over the internet. So let's go back to the dashboard, and let's go and select our soon to be running instance. And you will notice over here, IPv4 public IP address. This is the IP address that we're going to be reaching the vNIOS appliance over the internet at. Okay, so let's go back to Azure. Now again, this is going to take about 5 minutes. So let's go back to Azure, and let's see where we are. So it's been 4 minutes and 25 seconds. It's going to take a couple more minutes for Azure to wrap it up. But at this point, if you go to virtual machine, you are going to see the VA25M1. Even though it's still creating, right? But you can see it. And if you click on it, and you click on networking, guess what? You will see the internal IP address and the public routable IP address. This is a static public routable IP address where you are going to connect to your Azure instance at. This is exactly similar to AWS, remember? The IPv4, where I manually had to assign it. With Azure, I basically told it during provisioning process to give it a public routable IP address. I could have done the same thing in AWS, but I really wanted to show you the extra step of how you can associate a public routable IP address to the virtual machine. All right, so while we're waiting for it, we need to do a couple of things at the grid master to tell the grid master to accept connection from the Azure endpoint or from the Azure grid member and the AWS grid member. So the first thing we need to do before I actually show you the steps, there's one very important thing you need to do, and that is you need to create NAT groups. Now, why do you need a NAT group? Now, let's talk about that for a second. Now, when you configure, when you want to add an entry here at the grid master to tell it, hey, I want to accept connections from this remote Azure endpoint, you need to provide the IP address of the remote endpoint. Now, the IP address of the remote endpoint is this private IP address, 10.0.0.5, but this is private to Azure. It is not visible on the internet. Now, when you create an entry over here, you gotta give it the private IP address, which is 10.0.0.5. However, well, the grid master doesn't know how to talk to 10.0.0.5. It knows how to talk to the public routable IP address, which is this guy. So we need to do an extra step to basically enable the grid master to know, yep, this is the private IP address of the grid member, but it's coming from this public routable IP address. And this is the whole concept of a NAT group. So we need to create a NAT group, and it's very simple. You say basically select your grid master over here. You click on grid properties, and you will see an option here called NAT groups. Now, I went ahead and I created a few ahead of time, but it's very simple. If you click on plus and you basically give it a name, let's say, you know, XYZ, and it's there. But anyway, I did it ahead of time, so we don't have to do it one by one. So I already created several NAT groups, as you can see here. One NATG Azure, NATG AWS, and a few others that we can use later on if I need it. So that's it. That's all what I need to do over here, and you will see how we're going to use it shortly. Okay, so make sure the NAT groups entries are created ahead of time for the grid master. So now let's go ahead and create an entry for Azure. So we're going to click on plus, and this is a virtual appliance, so we're going to select vNIOS, and we're going to give it a name. So this will be, let's say, Azure m1.mycompany.com, which is the zone that I already created ahead of time. All right, click next. Now we need to give it the internal IP address of the Azure endpoint, which is 10.0.0.5. So let's go ahead and do that. The subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. And the gateway is basically ends with 1, right? This is kind of standard stuff. If you don't know what the subnet mask is, when you boot up the VM, you can log in and you can get this info, but I already know what it is, so I just typed it ahead of time. Click on next, click on save and close. Now you can see here, I already added an entry for Azure, but we're not done yet. We need to let it know the public IP address of Azure. Remember, we talked about NAT groups, so we need to go to edit. We're gonna go to networking, or to network, and we're going to click on the advanced tab, scroll down, and you see over here NAT. You can click on the NAT group and you select NATG Azure, and here you type in the public routable IP address of Azure, which is this guy. Okay, again, you have to do it this way so the grid master knows both the IP address of your private instance as well as where it's coming from. All right, you do that, click on save and close. You will get this message, say yes, and it will basically take a few seconds to configure it. All right, so we've done that for the Azure endpoint. Let's do the same thing for the AWS entry. So again, same thing, plus, and we can call it AWS m1.mycompany.com. Click on next. And same thing, let's give it the private IP address. So we're going to go to is1, and it's this guy. Actually, you can click here on copy, and let's go ahead and paste it. And same thing, 255.255.255.0, and the gateway ends with .1. All right, save and close. And just like we did before, we edit, we go back to network. We go to advanced tab and we scroll down to NAT group, and we're now going to select NATG AWS, and we need the public routable IP address, and which is over here. Again, you click on copy to clipboard, and let's go ahead, save and close, and done. All right, so now the grid master has the 2 entries needed for it to accept connections from the remote grid members. So let's go to Azure. The Azure virtual machine should be ready by now. You can see here it's running. If you go here, you will see the deployment has been successful. So all of the steps are done. So we are ready to connect. So one nice feature that's available in Azure that is not available in AWS is the ability to connect to the virtual machine via its console. So if you click on it and you scroll down, you see over here, Serial Console. This is basically give the ability to connect directly to the virtual machine and start typing your commands. Unfortunately, AWS doesn't allow you to do this. In AWS, you need to know the public routable IP, SSH into it, and start using it. The problem with that approach is if something bad happens to your virtual machine and you cannot for some reason connect to it over the internet, you simply are locked out. You just can't connect to it because there's no console access. With this approach on Azure, even if you can't connect to the VM over the internet, you can simply come here to the Serial Console and connect to it as if you're sitting in front of your computer. Okay? So here we go. Let's type admin and we give it the same password that we did when we configured it for the first time. So make sure you remember your password. So the first thing I'm going to do is this. I'm going to do show network to confirm that I get the 10.0.0 IP, 10.0.0.5 IP address. I'm going to show you that actually I'm connected to the internet via the public routable IP address. So if I try to ping the Google DNS IP address, you can see it pings successfully. Now, I can't ping by domain name because I don't have the DNS and the forwarding service enabled on the grid member. And that's okay, we don't need it. We just need the ability to ping IP addresses on the internet, which is fine. The next thing is if you do show licenses, this will show you all the licenses that are activated by default when you spin up the grid member. Okay, in this case, the grid master. All right, great. Well, how do I connect to this instance over the internet? Remember our public routable IP address. So if you go to networking, you see this guy. So let's go ahead and copy it. And let's go ahead and open a new tab. And I'm going to HTTPS. And I get it with the IP address. And lo and behold, I can connect to it. And I will give it a few seconds. And then we'll go ahead and type in the username and password. And again, make sure to remember your password, which is what you set during the provisioning process of your virtual machine under Azure. Now, this will take a few seconds to log in. And again, we are connecting to this appliance over the internet. Now, this is a real public, I'm doing this step by step. This is not like some recorded. This is like real actually happening right now as I'm recording this. So I'm connecting over the internet to this appliance. So I'm going to click on I accept. Again, you got to wait a few more seconds. And we are connected to the grid master. All right. If you click on the grid master, you will see, and if you move to the side, you will see the platform is Azure, and you can see it's the V825 appliance. All right. So I just wanted to show you that you can connect to your instance over the internet. And let's do the same thing for AWS while we're at it. So it should be running by now. So again, let's copy the IP address. Open a new tab, type HTTPS. Actually, as a matter of fact, not yet, because AWS is a bit different, because you need to apply temporary licenses when you connect to it. So what we need to do is we need to SSH into the appliance. So let's go ahead and launch PuTTY, and then basically it's an SSH client, and type in the IP address of the AWS member, or in this case, again, still a grid master. Click open. You're going to see this, yep, no problem. And let's go ahead, type admin, and the default password is Infoblox. All right, so if you first thing, let's do this. Show network, yep, this is my internal IP address. And of course, you can ping Google, because I'm just connecting to it over the internet, so it's going to work. But what I really wanted to show you is when you spin this up under AWS for the first time, if you do show licenses, there are no licenses set. So let's go ahead and enable temporary licenses to get started. So set temp license, and we're going to select option number 2. Okay. And now if you do show licenses again, you will see the DDI licenses. Now we also need to enable the vNIOS license. So we do the same thing, set temp, and we select option number 4. You can see here, add NIOS license, option 4. And you select the model that you want, and we're going to pick the entry-level one, which is the V825, and say yes. Now, This is going to reboot the appliance. So you will see shortly that my SSH connection is going to be gone, because again the appliance is going to reboot. So let's wait for it. Okay, so the appliance rebooted. So let's go ahead and log back in, admin, and again the default password is Infoblox. And if you do show licenses, you can see all the DDI licenses, including the NIOS appliance. Now it's going to take again a few more minutes, maybe 2 to 3 more minutes, for all the services to start, and then you'll be able to connect to this virtual appliance over the internet via the public routable IP address. Now if we go ahead to this tab that we just opened and we do HTTPS and we give it the public routable IP address of the instance, again it's going to take some time, so it's not ready yet because the services are being started. So let's give it a couple more minutes and we'll be able to connect to the virtual appliance over the internet. So now that the services started, you can see we get this message. Click on Advanced, Proceed. And now we're connecting to the Grid Manager again over the internet, running in AWS. So again, admin, the default password is Infoblox, and we are connecting to it. We'll go ahead, click on I accept. So now we're connected to the Grid Master over the internet. Again, this is running in AWS. If you click on Grid, just like we did with Azure, if you move to this side, you can see here the platform is AWS. And again, it's the VA25 model. Again, so this is running in AWS, and if you click on this tab, this is running in Azure. Okay, so again, Azure, AWS. All right, so now let's go back to the Grid Manager for a second, just to give you a quick review of what we've done so far. So we've created an entry for Azure, we've created an entry for the AWS member. We have both Azure and AWS Grid Masters running. The question is, well, okay, how do you connect the grid, basically convert the Grid Master in AWS to become a Grid member so it can connect to the Grid Master running on-prem? So for that, very simple, we simply need to connect. Now there are two ways. You could SSH into this instance just like you did under AWS, or you can open the console. I prefer to use the console with Azure. It's just much easier. So I come over here and I type set membership, and it's going to ask me for the VIP, which is the virtual IP address of the Grid Master, which is in our case this guy, so 288.50. And again, this is our on-prem Grid Master. So we're going to connect to it. I already opened the right ports and I did all the firewalling and did all of this stuff just to make it really easy. You're connected directly to it. Now in real life, you never do this. You don't expose your Grid Master to the internet, but again, I needed to do this so I can show you the live demo. Okay, so let's come back to the console and let's go ahead and paste the IP address of the Grid Master. Next is enter the grid name. The default is Infoblox. I'm using the default, so hit enter. And enter the grid shared secret. By default, it's called test, which again, I'm using the default, so I'm gonna call it test. And say yes. Are you sure you want to connect? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. So now the appliance is going to reboot, and one of the beautiful things about the serial console is you can actually see what's actually happening. So now we're going to reboot or restart the services on the Grid member, and it's going to attempt to connect to the Grid Master shortly. So let's give it a few more seconds while it starts to restart, and then we're going to switch over to the Grid Master, and I'm going to show you that the connection is going to start to occur between the remote member and the Grid Master. So they're going to start to synchronize, share data. It's going to reboot a couple of times. So this is going to take a few minutes for the synchronization to occur. So here you go. Let's do a refresh. And you can see it's connecting, synchronizing. And within a few seconds, the appliance is going to restart again. So there will be a couple of restarts before it's all done. So here you go, system restart. You can see it. So if you go back to the Grid Master, do a refresh, you can see offline because again, the Grid member is going to restart. And again, this does this a couple of times. So the first time basically is connecting to synchronize. Next time is going to apply the configurations, and then the last time it will be ready to connect. So again, a couple of restarts and you'll be ready to connect. So let's just wait for it because I'd like to make sure the connection went there smoothly. before we move on and do the same thing under AWS. So you can see here, starting services. Let's do a refresh. Again, this is going to take a couple more minutes. Again, you just wait, another minute or so, and it's going to be green. Here you go. It's running. Great. So we just connected our grid member running in Azure to our on-prem grid master. Again, this is all done live right now as I'm recording this over the internet. Great. So the first thing I want to do before I forget is I need to go to services and turn on, make sure that basically in this case, I need to make sure I turn on the DNS service of the Azure grid member. So I select it, and you see here this button, click start, yes. And it will take another 30 seconds or so to start the DNS service, and you get to see this message. Yep, it's going to take some time. Click close, and let's refresh, and there it is. So now the DNS service is running on the Azure endpoint. So again, if you select the Azure endpoint, now if you scroll down, you will see additional information. You will see the serial number, which you didn't see before, because again, now we connected the grid member to the grid master, so we have more information about it. All right, and if you need more information about the Azure endpoint, you come over here, you go to edit, and again, this you'll see it's a VA25. You get to see how it's networked, just like we did before. So it's all good. All right, great. So let's do the same thing for AWS. Now remember, with AWS, there's no such thing as a console, so you have to SSH. So we're SSHing into the grid member running in AWS, and you can see the IP address. It ends with .139, and you can see here 139. So same thing, we're now going to do set membership, and we're going to give it the VIP of the grid master that's running on-prem, just like we did with Azure. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this guy. Okay, and hit enter. Again, Infoblox. Again, we'll use the default share key test. Say yes, yes. Now it's going to reboot. As you can see, we lost our SSH connection, and again, this is where we would hope that everything goes smoothly and the grid member is going to restart and connect. Otherwise, because if you can't connect to the grid member, you really there's no way around it, right? You don't have console access. This is one nice feature again I like about Azure that AWS unfortunately doesn't have. So now we just have to wait. It's going to take probably a couple of minutes for the services to start. And same thing, the grid member in AWS is going to connect to the grid master on-prem and synchronize. So we just have to wait. Let's just be patient here. Now, while we're waiting for this, couple of things I want to mention. Things went fairly fast because the grid master and the grid member are using the same version of our DDI appliance, which in our case we're using version 8.3.0. If the client is using an older version, let's say 8.0 or 8.1, it will actually connect to the grid master and it will download the latest version from the grid master, and that will take some time. It could easily take 5-10 minutes. All right, so right now, luckily for us, we're using the same version, so things go fairly fast. But again, if you're using an older version of the grid member, it will simply download the latest version from the grid master over the internet, apply it, reboot it, so there will be more reboots going on, and eventually it will work. So here you go. We're connecting, we're synchronizing, and again, there will be a restart. So we're going to lose our connection just like we did under Azure. So give it some time. And as you can see, now we're offline. Basically, the appliance is rebooting and it's going to try to connect again in another minute to the grid master. And here you go. The grid member was able to connect to the grid master. Again, this is using the AWS instance, as you can see here. And again, just like we did before, let's go to services and let's make sure we enable the DNS service on the AWS grid member. Again, give it a few more seconds and we'll be able to connect. And there you have it. The DNS service is running and everything looks good. All right, so before we continue, let's just do a quick summary of what we've done so far. Again, I have my grid master initially with a grid, basically a grid master running on-prem along with this grid member again running on-prem, and you can see here the naming. I called it, VA20 on-prem. Then I went ahead and I spun up an instance under Azure. I provisioned it, I set membership, and I was able to connect my grid member running in Azure to my grid master running on-prem. I did the same thing for AWS. I spun up a grid member running in AWS, and I was able to connect it to the grid master running on-prem. So now, again, I have beautiful, centralized visibility into both on-prem and in the cloud. You as a user or as an admin, you really have no idea what's going on here, because the only way you can find that this is running in Azure and AWS, you just simply have to come over here and decide that, yep, this is AWS and Azure, which is exactly what we intended it to do. Intended this product to be very seamless, very elegant, and when you're managing your DDI infrastructure, it really doesn't matter if you're doing it on-prem or in the public cloud. All right, great. So things are looking good. We're able to connect all of these remote appliances to the on-prem. Now what? What do we do now? The first thing you need to do is to run vDiscovery, and vDiscovery will give you the ability to discover all appliances running in a remote environment. So let's start by configuring vDiscovery for Azure. So I click on the Cloud tab, and I click on vDiscovery, and I click on Discovery Manager, and I click on the plus sign, and I give it a name. So let's call it Azure V1 or VD1 for vDiscovery 1. Okay. I select my Azure endpoint, which is Azure member 1. Click next, and I click on server type, which is Azure. Now, I need to provide some sensitive information to how to connect to my Azure endpoint. So there's a service entry, client ID, secret, client secret. You get this information from your Azure account, and you copy and paste them over here. So I'm gonna pause this video, copy and paste this information, and I'll be right back. All right, so I'm back. I copied and pasted all this sensitive information that are applicable to my account, and I'm gonna click on next. Next is basically you need to decide, do you want to use the default view or you want to create your own view? Now remember earlier in the video I showed you in the grid master there is something called default view, which is created by default, or you can create a new one that are applicable for a particular domain. Now the whole point for a network view in a nutshell is if you have overlapping IPs that you want to use at the same time. So for example, company A acquires company B and both companies have the same exact internal IP address space. Well, with network view, you can solve this issue by saying network view for company A, another network view for company B. Both of them can have the same existing IP address space and no conflict will occur. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and say I want to create an automatic network view for Azure, and this will be automatically created based on the tenant ID that was provided by Azure, which is really a nice way to segment how information, hey, you have data on-prem, data in Azure, data in AWS. So sometimes it makes sense to have multiple network views. It's really up to you, but in this demo, I want to use a network view for Azure as well as a network view later on for AWS. Okay, click on next. This is how it's gonna, when you do a discovery, do you want to merge your existing data with the new data, or what do you want to do? So for the interest of time, we'll just leave the default. And how often do you want to run vDiscovery? You can run it every few minutes, hours, days, whatever. So for now, we're gonna run it manually, but usually you can run it every few, every like couple of hours or so, right? Depending on how things change in your environment. Save and close. Again, let's quickly review our setup. So if you go to this entry, click on edit. We started by giving the job a name. We selected the Azure member. This is the sensitive information you need to copy and paste from your account. We decide if you want to use a default view or a new view, how you want to do with the data that you discovered, and how often you want to run your discovery. All right. So with that, we are ready to run vDiscovery. Now, it's always recommended to wait like another 30 seconds, a minute before you run it, because again we're doing some stuff behind the scenes. So let's go ahead and run it. And if it doesn't run, you simply run it again. So click on start, click yes, and job is started. Okay, good, job in progress. And it's fairly fast. And now this will finish very quickly because I don't have a lot of resources or a lot of VMs running in Azure. You can see, boom, it's done very fast. So now if I click on close, watch what happens. Boom, there it is. The Azure platform, management platform, became visible in the Cloud tab. There was nothing there, right? And this is the basically the tenant ID. As you can see here, the name and the ID. And it tells you how many VMs it discovered, how many networks, and so on and so forth. A lot of cool information. Now, if you drill down, if you click on the name, you will get to see all the network that it discovered in Azure. And if you click on VMs, you will see the VMs that are available in Azure. Now, in my case, I only have like one VM, so not much, not terribly exciting, but at least you'll get to see how things work. VPC, this is the virtual private cloud terminology basically, and you can see here it discovered 2 VPCs. And you can see detailed information about each of the VPCs. Okay. Networks, again, the network it discovered in Azure. VMs, what VMs do I have running in Azure, and so on and so forth. It's all there. Okay. Now, if you click on data management, you see there's a default view, which is what ships with the product. But now you have another view which didn't exist before. This is the view that got automatically created via vDiscovery because we told it to create a new view. So let's select that. And again, you will see only the resources that are visible in Azure. Versus if you go to default, you will see the resources that are only available on-prem. Again, this is a nice way. I mean, that's how I like to do it. You could combine both of them. You can combine everything in default. But again, to make the demo interesting, it makes sense to just have it create a new view. As a matter of fact, if you go to administration, you go to network views, you will see here the view that got created. And you can see here auto-created by vDiscovery. Right? It's all there. Okay, great. So looks good. Now let's do the same thing for the AWS entry. So we're gonna go to vDiscovery, Discovery Manager, plus we're gonna call it AWS VD1. Again, for vDiscovery because it's for AWS. We select the AWS member 1. And same thing, we come over here, instead of Azure, we select AWS, and again, I need to enter some sensitive information for this to work. So I'm gonna pause the video, enter the information, and we'll come back. All right, so we're back. I entered all of the sensitive information I was telling you about earlier, just like we did for Azure. We click on next, same thing. You wanna use default or a new tenant? Yep, I wanna create a new tenant for this particular demo. And yes, I'm gonna use the default. And yes, I'm gonna use the default. Save and close. All right, again, just to review, click on edit. Again, we have the name, the member, we have the endpoint with all the information I basically provided. I got this from my AWS account. Yep, I want to create a new network view. Yes, I want to basically use the default policy in terms of how I'm going to merge my existing data with my discovered data and how often do I want to run it. All right, so let's go ahead, select that entry and click on start. Are you sure you want to start? Say yes. Do a refresh. Now, this happens sometimes. It doesn't start right away. This is why I said earlier, sometimes it's better to just give it a minute before you start it because it's still doing some stuff behind the scene. So let's just wait a few more seconds. And we'll probably have to try it a couple of times before it works. So click on start. And you can see now it's starting. And here you go, it's running. And again, it's gonna finish fairly quickly because I don't have a lot of resources running in AWS. And here you go, it's done. Now watch what happens when I click on close. You're gonna see the Amazon management platform appear. Okay, watch this. Click close, and there it is. Okay, so you can see here it discovered the Amazon entries, and now if I click on this guy, you'll get to see the networks. In this case, it's showing everything. And you go to VMs, it shows all the VMs under Amazon. And again, if you go to data management, lo and behold, it created the entries for Amazon, for the views. And here you go, this is one view. The other view doesn't really have anything, it's empty. But the one I'm going to be using is this guy. All right? Versus this one is for Azure, like we talked about earlier. All right? And if you go to administration, network views, you can see the network views already created. All right, so now go back to the Cloud tab. Great, we've done this for Amazon, we've done this for Azure. Well, what about VMware? What about the on-prem VMware environment that we have? Remember this guy, the on-prem? Well, this is running on-prem. This is running on my data center. Can I do vDiscovery for VMware? Yes, you can. We're gonna come here. We're gonna go to vDiscovery, and we're gonna do the same thing, except now we're gonna call it VMware. We're gonna call it VD1, and we're gonna select the on-prem agent or the on-prem grid member, which is this guy. And now we're gonna say VMware. Now for VMware, we're gonna give it the IP address or the domain name for vCenter server. So vCenter server will basically host all your VMs, right? So again, give me 1 minute while I gather this information and we'll continue. All right, I'm back. I entered all of the information, and this is again the IP address of my vCenter server running in my private isolated lab environment. Yep, I'm using HTTPS, and I gave it the username password to connect to my vCenter server. All right, now, do I want to create a network view or want to use the default one? I really want to use the default one in this case because again, this is my on-prem environment. I'd like to use the default one. I'm not going to create a new one, so I say default. Now over here, I want to show you one cool feature we've added, a year or two ago. Is this: for every newly discovered IP address, I want you to create a host record. So if I discovered a VM with an IP address, with a specific IP address, I can automatically create a DNS host record based on some kind of a policy. So this policy, I'm going to use this default policy, which is basically the VM name.mycompany.com. So it will automatically, if it discovers a VM, it will automatically assign it a name, and it will put it basically under the mycompany.com domain name, which is really a powerful feature, as you will see shortly. And it will do this automatically for you on the fly for all the hosts that it discovers. Click on next and save and close. And just like before, let's just give it 30 seconds to a minute while it's doing its thing behind the scenes, and then we can start it. And then once it finishes, you will see an entry for VMware, just like you have for Amazon and AWS, and you'll be able to see all of the resources it discovered. Now, my lab environment is a decent size. I have a lot of VMs in it, so this is going to take some time. So let's go ahead and start it. It's running. Here you go. Job in progress. And this is going to take a while. So this could easily take like 4 or 5 minutes for it to finish because I have a fairly decent size environment. It really depends on the size of your environment, right? I mean, if you only have a couple of VMs like I do in AWS and Azure, you saw it was very quick, like 20 seconds it was over. With VMware, I have a fairly decent size lab environment, so it's going to take a while to discover everything. I have about like 30 VMs or so, configured different configurations, multiple switches. I mean, it's going to take some time to discover everything. So let it run, and we'll come back. All right, so we're back. It took about 4 or 5 minutes for this job to run. So click on close, and guess what? Here it is. VMware Management Platform appeared, and you can see it discovered 29 VMs, which is exactly what I had in mind. And if you click on default, you'll get to see all the VMs. So now you understand why it's taking a while, right? I mean, it had to go and discover all of these resources. If you click on the next tab, you can see more resources. Click on the next tab, more resources, right? So it discovered a lot of stuff. Now, great. This is the feature that I've been wanting to show you. If I click on data management, click on DNS, and then I need to switch back to default, right? And you see here mycompany.com. Click on mycompany.com. And you get to see all the IP addresses of all the VMs that it discovered, but more importantly, it created a host record for each of the discovered devices, the VMs. Now, the reason why I did that is because of the policy that I configured earlier during vDiscovery. Remember, let's go back to the vDiscovery configuration just to make sure this concept is clear. And let's go to VMware, Edit, Network View. Remember, I told it to use the default view, which it did. And data collection, consolidation, you can see here, I told her host, and I told it to basically create the VM name and my company. So it automatically created all of these for you. So again, if you go back to data management, you can see as it discovered the VMs, it automatically created the host record for them. All right. And of course, you could do the same thing for in AWS and Azure. I just wanted to show it to you under VMware. All right, so let's go back to the Cloud tab one more time. Go to Tenants, and again, you can see Amazon, Azure, VMware. We also support OpenStack, and very soon we'll also be adding Google Cloud Platform to the list, so you'll be able to bring it all together under one umbrella. Okay, and you can see here under VPC, you can see the Amazon VPC. You can see all the configuration here. Now, one other thing I'd like to show you is if you go under VM, and you can create some filters. So right now, I can say, show me under Cloud Management Platform equal to, let's say, Amazon. And click apply. And you can see it will filter it down to the Amazon VMs. Or only show me Azure VMs. Click apply. And you can see Azure. And then show me VMware. And of course, you're going to get a lot. All right, so you get the idea here. You can do filtering, and you can do filtering on all types of information here. I mean, it's very flexible in terms of how you filter. And of course, one other thing we do is you can actually export all of this data to an Excel spreadsheet. So if you click on this button and say export, yes, and now it's exporting it, download, and you can open it under Excel. I don't have Excel on this machine, but you get the idea. You can open it, you get a nice fancy table, and you get to see all of your data over here. Okay, so it's totally supported. All right, now one other feature I'd like to show you, which is specific to AWS, and that is the integration that we have with Route 53. So Route 53 is basically Amazon's way of doing DNS, or it's their method of doing DNS. And what I want to show you is if I create a DNS record in Route 53 under Amazon, I would like to synchronize it to bring it down to the grid master. So that way I still have that centralized visibility for DNS records created by, of course, by our DDI appliance, as well as DNS records that got created by Route 53. And again, this is part of the unified view of both on-prem and the cloud, bringing everything together on the grid master. Very powerful capability. All right, so how do you do it? Well, let's go to administration and let's go to users. We're going to create a user account for Route 53. So let's call it Route 53. Okay, the user, and we give it a password. Okay. And we need to select the Cloud API only account. All right, just remember this this user, Route 53, and then the password. Click Save and Close. So that's the first thing we need to do. Next, we need to go to the Cloud tab, and we need to enter a bunch of information. Now, again, this information are sensitive to your account that we need to copy and paste here. So, all right, I'm back. So I entered this information that are specific to my account. Select the newest user. Remember, we created Route 53. That's why you needed this account. Save and close. Okay, so that's the second step. Third step, we need to come here to the grid Amazon, and we need to create the entry to do the synchronization with Route 53. So we're gonna call it synchronization group 1. We select the member, which is AWS member. We're going to select the username, password for the account we created in the earlier step, and we're going to say use the default. All right, now click on plus. We get it a name, ST1 for sync task 1. And how often do you want to do the discovery? Let's say every 5 minutes. And yep, I want to do both public hosted zones and private hosted zones. This is AWS stuff. Click on add, save and close. All right, and now we come here, view sync details, and let's go ahead and run it. Now before I run it, I need to show you what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna go to data management, I'm gonna go to DNS. I want to make sure I'm in my default view, and you can see here there's something called mycompany.com. Now let's go to the AWS account and let's go to Route 53. So let me go to Route 53, and under my Route 53 account I have two zones, two hosted zones. So if I click on hosted zone, you will see there's something called test zone and there's something called public zone. So if you go private zone. So if you go to private zone, you will see I have a bunch of records created over here. Okay, and tested zone, I only have like a few records. So what I'm going to do right now when I run this task is going to connect to this section in Route 53 and download both of the zones along with all the host records and bring it into the grid master. And it's going to do it elegantly, very fast. All right, so let's go to the grid master. Again, let's go back to grid, come back here, and we're gonna go ahead and run it. Run task now, and assuming I've entered my credentials correctly, here you go, it should take a few seconds to run. Hosted zone successfully fetched. Again, give it a few more seconds, completed. Now again, we're running it manually, but in real life, you know, it runs every 5 minutes because that's the policy, but for the interest of this demo, I run it manually, but it runs. Okay, click close. Now let's go to data management, and lo and behold, what do you see? Private zones and test zones. So if you go inside the private zone, you can see all the records that are there, and if you go to the test zone, you can see all the records that are there. Alright, so let's test it one more time. Let's go to Route 53, go to private zone, and I'm gonna create a zone, create a record. So let's call it demo 1. And since this is demo, let's call it 444. Okay. So again, demo1.private zone, and this is the IP address. Click create, and where is it? Here it is, demo1. So now let's go to the grid master. Again, go to the private zone. It's not going to be there yet because we haven't run the synchronization. You have to wait 5 minutes, or we can run it manually. So let's go ahead and run it manually. So let's go to the grid, come back here, view, and do the same thing. Run it. And here we go. Give it a few seconds to run. And close. Go back to data management. And there you have it. Demo 1 got downloaded. Okay? So that's the beauty of configuring Route 53. Again, go back to the single pane of glass. You bring in all this data from AWS. You bring it down to your grid master. You have a beautiful visibility into your environment. It's all there. Let's summarize everything we've done. I know we've covered quite a bit. So over here, we started the demo by showing you the grid master and the grid member on-prem. We spun up a grid member running in Azure. We spun up another grid member running in AWS. We connected to each of these grid masters over the internet. Then we changed the entry basically with upset membership to make sure the grid members connect to the grid master on-prem for both Azure and AWS. We started the DNS service. We did vDiscovery for Azure, then vDiscovery for AWS, then vDiscovery for VMware. We could show you all of the centralized visibility for all both on-prem in the cloud. Then we showed you how to configure and run Route 53 integration, which basically bring down the records from Amazon into the on-prem grid master. With that, I hope that you found this video useful. Again, we only touched upon the essential features and functionality of our cloud offering. There is much more to it than what I just showed you today, but hopefully this gives you a very good idea what Infoblox is doing in the public cloud arena, and the smooth integration that you saw today, how we can actually make it seamless from an administrator perspective to bring in the data from your public cloud, integrate it with on-prem, and you have centralized visibility of all of your DDI data. With that, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please contact your Infoblox sales rep.